This is Holy Roman Empire, an old war gamer magazine put up. The designer was Mark McLaughlin. He's doing, or attempting to get a Kickstarter going to reprint this. And this one has a lot of issues. I haven't played it yet. We're going to work through it together. It may be beyond our capability, but I think there's a game in here as defined. It's just the rules are very, very rough, and the components have some issues in terms of a number of things. But it also may be that there's some fundamental concepts that the component problems are hiding. We'll see if we can kind of find those, as well as maybe get an accurate playing of the rules. That's kind of the hard thing. So what you have for the game is a map of mainly the Imperial territory, stretching into France, Poland, etc. The key battlefields or conflict locations of the 30 Years' War. Each player, and we have a number here, we have Spain, France, Palatinate, Sweden, the Austrians with a humongous pile of cards, and Bavaria. It pretty much covers the major players involved here. There's some minor players that, like the United Provinces, that fall under control of other players. So, for example, the Palatinate controls the United Provinces here. There's a very similar shield. There's a bunch of other national alignments here. So this is the Prussians, who have a whole set of cards available. Well, Brandenburg. And Saxony also has a set of cards, and then a whole bunch of others, which I should probably unsort. We have, or stack or something. We have mercenary cards, which have specific named mercenaries on them. One of them starts in play, Mansfeld here, or Mansfield. Each player has their own color set, and some of the minors do as well. It's hard to determine what the major power ones are. You kind of have to look at the leader names and try to figure it out that way, because there is a really terrible presentation of the information of the rules. These cards, they have a bunch of information on them. They have the income of the province they represent. So this is Spain itself. They have the religious alignment and a picture of the coat of arms. On the back, they have further information on them. Here there's going to be a map location, so you can find it. I'm not quite sure how those work, because we have this number system around here, but I think that's the victory point track. 8, 116. Well, let's look at 116, and 8 would be here, and that's Milan. So somehow the victory point track also serves as the coordinate grid. It's also the turn track. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the money track. Okay. Let's start looking at how the game is supposed to go, and we'll try to see what we can do with it. Okay. We have turns. Each one's about 2 years. We start with a random events phase, but not on the first turn. Financial phase. A diplomatic bidding, where you're going to be trying to buy cards, which don't necessarily have to be up in the open. You can try to buy them from other players as well. Alliance declaration. Movement and combat, which I think is sequential for each player. And then a victory in game conclusion. So for random events, one player rolls 2 dice and consults the random events card. I don't have a card that says random events on it, but I think there's a table here somewhere. Yeah, there's a little... Unfortunately, the tables are not in an insert. They're in the rules, kind of embedded. They're not on the back page. They're nowhere you can get to them easily. Wargamer's really bad at presentation in general, and this is one of the worst that I've seen. And then they say the cards are... The events are pretty much self-explanatory, so I, of course, didn't read them to judge that. Okay, during the finances, you get the income. Now, you're going to get the income off your cards, and that's listed in the corner of the card. Some of them have parenthesized income, which you don't get. Now, that income is going to be full value if you have it in your control section, and half value if it's in your influence section. You have 3 sections to your sort of tableau: control, influence, and conquer. You don't get anything if a card is conquered. If the state's income is marked in quotes, that's Bohemia there, that's marked in quotes. If it's held by anyone other than the original player, the income will be reduced. I think it's halved. If the income is in parentheses, unless it's Poland or Turkey, the player rolls a die for additional income. Okay, I thought that you just don't get the income. No, the United Provinces, you don't get the income, so I don't know why it's got a parenthesized income. Maybe there's scenarios where the UP is actually a player. I don't know. Or maybe it's for some sort of completion. These rules are all filled with special cases, just kind of folded into them. Again, the designer has indicated that he's learned a lot from the release of this game back when, and the components that he's put together in the draft version for the Kickstarter look really nice. And he's kind of made an assurance that the rules are much cleaner. Okay. You lose money for each province or city that's occupied by enemy combat units or has a looted marker. If you have an income of 4 or less, you can pawn your crown jewels, and you roll 2 dice and get that much extra money. But you can't do that twice in a row on 2 consecutive turns. And the income is going to be used by placing a political marker on the income track. Now, we have these political markers that are blanks on one side. I think they're meant to go on the alliance chart, but maybe they're meant to go on the income chart. Maintenance. Then you have to pay for each of your units. And that's going to be 1 crown for each unit that you have under your control. And we have some units starting on the board. The units are very, very difficult to discern. That's a leader. These are the sort of freely available, which maybe I shouldn't be using for them, but I couldn't find any Bavarian units. But here, for example, are some Swiss. We have different types of units, and they're back printed. In some cases, one country's units are printed on the back of the white units. For example, the Poles have, yeah, there's one. That's a Polish infantry on one side and a general use cav on the other. There's that kind of messiness to this, where it's not necessarily easy to find the pieces you need because they're not the same color on both sides. They also, I think, aired, although I don't have any errata available right now, this light cav here, which looks kind of light. I don't know what it looks like. It looks like a dude running away. It looks like a robber or something. That's apparently actually elite cav, from what I can tell. These are really, really common. So maybe they're the light cav. I don't know. But there you have it. Wherever any nationality has elite cav, the only thing I can say is they have this symbol on it. And that symbol's pretty rare, whereas the other is the most common type of cav there is. Okay, upgrading cards. In addition to maintaining units, you can upgrade the status of cards on your administrative track. It costs 2 full crowns to upgrade a card from Conquered to Influence, and 1 crown from Influence to Control. And you can only do this 1 level per turn. And obviously, you get more money the higher the influence, and also they're harder for other people to take from you. Then you're allowed to buy units. You can buy any of your national units. They're the units that have your color. And we have the prices here, including for leaders. Not all the powers have all their leaders on the board at the beginning. So, for example, there's a Spanish leader here available. A bunch of Austrians available for purchase. And they can go in the home provinces, in a province of the player's home territory. Any damaged units can be repaired for 1 crown each. You've already paid 1 for maintenance, and that flips it back to its full side value. Now, what is the full side and what is the half side is hard to tell. So elite infantry have regular infantry on the back. Gendarmes have, well, they have elite cav, but I think they have light cav on the back. These can be upgraded. And if you buy the weaker type, you can apparently upgrade them at a later point by repairing damage, as it were. Naval units are the other one which can be done. No other units can, and they'll have different kinds of symbols on them, and it won't be obvious at all. You know, it's pretty obvious infantry and cav, you can't just flip that, but in some cases it's really hard to tell what you're flipping and what you're not. And then we have what, these cav, yeah, that's the gendarmes. They're pretty rare too. Okay. And you pay these off your track, off your money off there. The purchases will be done in written and secretly, and basically everybody gets an equal share, but the proviso is the more expensive type of unit, the gendarmes and heavy artillery, which when hit don't turn into light artillery, I guess, in contravention of the other units. So the gendarmes and heavy artillery will get preference to the reverse side, i.e. units are allocated from gendarme to light artillery. I don't, you know, the wording of this, we've got gendarme in both, but heavy and light artillery. You can't trust the rules, you can't trust the pictures that they give. It's just a mess. So, if it turns out that you can't divide it equally, you throw some counters, some of these counters in a cup to randomly determine. I think those are used for turn order rather than for the track over here. Okay. We're going to have to switch batteries here. Right. The bidding is one of the more interesting things in the game. I'm trying to find a place where I can put my rules and show you them. I don't know why, but during bidding, you're going to be bidding for the cards that are available here and also ones that other people have. Whoever has the most cash starts by opening something up and bidding on it. If 2 people are tied, the Emperor gets the choice. The first player to bid chooses the item he wants to bid on and opens the bidding, and then it goes clockwise from there. After that item has been purchased, that player can pick another item and put it up for auction. If you're out of money, or if you've initiated bidding 3 times that turn, you can't start another one. Each player with money has the opportunity to initiate bidding. Only if you have the bid can you do so. The opening bid must be at least equal to the printed value of the card. So, well, like this has a value of 2. So you can't bid less than what its income is. A bid on a mercenary is going to be equal to the total income of all the cards held by that mercenary. This is a concept that's kind of weird. But when you consider Wallenstein, at least, you understand that, yeah, he sort of had a fairly large set of estates. Allocating that state might be a little ambitious, but it was a very wealthy producing territory, and, well, it's not completely outrageous to call it that. Although at the size of the states here, he was not given anything that qualifies as a state here. And he was the wealthiest of these mercenaries. But basically, you're able to assign them, in fact, you must assign them territories when you buy them. And you'll see that in a bit. So if the mercenary already has cards under his control, you have to add up all the cards he holds plus the maintenance cost, which is 1 each, right? Whatever, you know, the way this is written, total value in terms of maintenance costs. Well, maintenance costs are 1 each. That was defined previously. So why not just the number of units? Why confuse things? I don't know. Of any units, any non-national units stacked with him. Bids for leaders without troops or cards have to start at least a crown. If there's multiple leaders in a stack, the owner gets to declare who's got control over which units, and then the bidding proceeds from there if somebody wants to bring one of those specific leaders up. A bid can be modified. Some cards... I'm going to show you this one because it says Brandenburg control. This is control. Some will say influence, some will say hereditary, a number of different things. Let's see what this does. If a card is controlled or influenced or hereditary property of a player, or a card which that player currently controls, each of these doubles the bid. So, Bohemia, which is not there. I lost Bohemia. There it is. Bohemia has Palatinate control, and it's in their control. So that would be doubled twice. So it's very, very expensive to take something away from someone. But you can force them to make a bid. Now, their minimum bid, because it's doubled, twice, is much less. So the Palatinate has a base bid of 8. Well, that means for the Palatinate themselves, they only have to bid 2 in order to match that. And you have to exceed the bid of the last player. If a card is listed as being pro a player, some of the cards will say, I got one somewhere that says pro-Danish. Okay, this one says anti-Holy Roman Emperor Spain. And that'll mean that the value of the bid is halved. But if it says pro, the value of the bid, instead of being doubled, is 50% greater than the current value. And I think fractions are dropped, if I'm not mistaken. It doesn't say that. No, they're not cumulative. Well, I don't know. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. In situations where several modifiers apply, the most advantageous takes precedence. So if a card's of a different religion from you, or is marked as anti, it'll be halved. Yeah. So they're not cumulative. So you still have to pay $4 to keep the Bohemia for the Palatinate, which means you can drain some money off them. If you're successful at your bid, you pay off your money, and you take the card into your influence pile, unless it's already in your control pile, or if it's hereditary or initially controlled, in which case it goes to control, and so does Mercenary for that matter. Some cards are reserve cards. For example, the King of France has the French Reserve. These can never be bid for, transferred, or conquered. No victory points will be allocated for those cards. Some are hereditary. They cannot be bid if the original owner holds the card. A player will only lose a hereditary card if the state is conquered, or if the owner trades it away. Some are marked as controlled, influenced, pro and anti, and some, the rest, are independent states, which are going to be kept off the board. And remember, you can only call up 3 per player. You can only start the bidding on 3 things. Special rules for a bunch of different countries, Poland, Switzerland, etc. Yeah, I don't want to go over all of these. But essentially, they all have their own little special rules on how they operate. And it's no worse than Europa Universalis. On the other hand, this is meant to be a little short game, not a several-month adventure. There are less of them here. Okay, mercenaries. When you bid a mercenary, if you buy it, you may have some issues here. You may have to pay some cards for it. The cost of maintaining mercenaries is halved, dropping fractions for their troops. And each leader has a political leaning. Von Arnhem can only be used by the controlling player. I don't know. So pro-French, pro-HRE. Okay. Von Mansfeld and Saxe-Weimar. The hiring player has to give these mercenaries a card from his control pile when he hires them, unless he already has them and he's bidding to keep someone else from taking them. Von Mansfeld also has an income of a crown. It's marked on his card down there, so I'll keep him face up, I guess. So I remember that. Which is added to the controlling player's income during the finance segment. Wallenstein. Wallenstein's more valuable. Any units stacked with him are maintained for free. However, you also have to pay more. Each time that you hire him, you must forfeit a card to him. Once per game at the start of any turn, if you employ him, you can appeal to Wallenstein to raise his own army. An infantry or reiter unit from the countermix is raised for each card held by Wallenstein. These units are then placed with him, and each subsequent diplomatic phase, however, the employer must roll a die and pay Wallenstein that amount of money. If he does not, Wallenstein and his mercenaries in the province containing him become marauders. Bribing mercenaries. You can bid for mercenaries that are employed by another player or who have become marauders, as well as mercenaries who are unemployed. They can be bid for either with money or cards from your control pile. The value of the card that is offered will be doubled for bidding. Thus, a state worth 2 crowns would be worth 4 crowns if it's offered as a bid. Mercenary held state cards. They're kept stacked with the mercenary. They're counted as independent. They have garrisons. Units and leaders accompanying the mercenary who holds these states, however, may treat them as controlled states. All players who bid on the mercenary states must bid at least double the value of the card if you're trying to buy it away from the mercenary somehow. It's not like the money goes to him or to another player when you buy something away. It's just they can be bid out of his hands. If you attack a state held by a mercenary, you may never bid to hire that mercenary again. And if you currently employ that mercenary, he immediately becomes a marauder. When you discharge a mercenary, you do this at the start of the diplomatic bidding phase. You roll a die and pay the mercenary half the number rolled in crowns. If you don't, the mercenary and any units stacked with him, any mercenary units, the white ones, become marauders. Once per turn at the start of the diplomatic bidding phase, before any bids are made, a player can try to assassinate one of his mercenaries. You purchase an assassin and roll a die to kill the leader. You must spend at least 1 crown to purchase an assassin. And you can spend an additional crown up to 3 in order to subtract 1 from the die roll. So you can get a 1 through 4. If you kill him, all his cards become independent. If the attempt is unsuccessful, the leader, non-national units stacked with him and his cards become independent and anti the would-be assassinating player. They'll have a penalty towards him. The assassinating player may never again bid for that mercenary, but he can bid or bribe for his estates. If the leader and troops are not bid for, they become marauders. We don't know what marauders do yet. We'll get to that, I hope. But maybe it's not in the rules. I don't remember. Oh yeah, there it is. Well, it's not a very big deal. If a mercenary is killed in battle or through assassination, his counters are removed from the map. The reverse or replacement side can be hired and returned to play on another bidding phase. The controlling player, if the controlling player does not have any national leaders or not enough national leaders to command all the mercenaries, then the excess mercenaries are put in a separate stack and they can be bid for immediately as a single force. The player with the most money remaining bids first, as if they were an unmaintained force. If they're not bid for, they become marauders. Although the cards stacked with the mercenary become independent states and are separated. Von Arnim, on the reverse of a mercenary leader counter, is the name of his replacement. When a leader's been killed, his replacement may be hired. Okay, so Von Arnim has no political loyalties, which, as far as I can tell, just means you don't have to bribe him with cards. And all the replacement mercenaries are the same. Okay, we're going to take a break here since I've already stopped the camera once. Okay, so 2 or more players can form an alliance. They put little markers in here to indicate they're allied. They should have control markers on the map for the areas people have under their control, actually. That's not specified anywhere. They can trade cards in their control pile, can give one another money, exchange mercenary leaders or non-national units, and they can only do it during the alliance phase. Too much garbage in my pipe. Players who are allied can't stack together, nor may they bid together, nor against each other. Well, they can give money. Allies have an ability to move together. They can declare during their movement phase that 1 or more of their leaders and units stacked with them will move in an ally's phase, but they have to be picked up in another stack, and they can only move once per turn total. No real mechanisms or design elements to allow you to mark that, so you'll just have to try to remember. Each player has a limited number of national forces except for the Austrian. National forces that aren't maintained or removed from play but can be re-entered into the game. Switzerland, Saxony, Brandenburg, Denmark, the United Provinces, and the Hanseatic League have their own military and their own color that appropriate. So, for example, here's the Saxons, and you can't really tell that that's not a player except by the color, but that's okay. All the white units are non-national forces, and these can be purchased for by anyone. If they're not maintained, they become marauders. They're all back printed. Independent states have garrisons of non-national infantry units equal to the income on the state card. This will be placed on the board if the state is attacked on its own. If it's a multi-province state, the entire garrison is placed in the province being attacked. If they're eliminated, the state is conquered. Yeah, you can get all of it, like So if you're attacking Upper Bohemia, you can also conquer Lower Bohemia by destroying the army. So garrisons always will happen, even if there aren't enough counters for them. You'll just have to fake them. If a state which is conquered, influenced, or controlled by a player is garrisoned only by the military units in the state. States that are influenced or controlled, however, have an additional non-national infantry unit in each province, I guess. Useless pipe. Naval units. Okay, naval units are kind of weird. So, one of the problems with this game is trying to read these things. We can't get close enough to read that. That says 2 on it. This says 1. The leaders also have a symbol on them, perhaps. Some of them have a little plus or 2 little pluses, and you can see that there. You might have been able to see the 1 too. Positioning of the camera was better and the zoom worked better there without blurring. If naval units are damaged, it costs 1 crown to upgrade them. It costs 2 to rebuild them. National leaders. Okay, national leaders can count as a combat unit. They count as a light cav, whatever that matters later. Or they can choose not to be used as a combat unit and just be used for their leadership benefit. If you use them as a combat unit, they have a chance of being killed in combat if the unit's destroyed. Elite infantry flip over to regular infantry. Gendarmes flip over to reiters. These units can be rebuilt for a crown each. Okay, non-national units that are not maintained become mercenaries and may be bid on by any player. If somebody bids and receives them, he can build and place any of his leaders not on the board on the stack, or he can integrate them into a stack in the same area, or he can just put a political control marker on them to indicate that they're his. Any mercenaries that are not bid for become marauders. And there don't appear to be any rules about them except that they sit on the board. I thought there would be rules where they do damage. We'll see. Maybe there are somewhere. Here we go. Marauders move first. If there are several marauder stacks, a die is rolled for order. If they begin in an unlooted province, they attack all the defending units in the province. If the marauders outnumber the defenders. If they win the battle, they get to loot the province. If they begin the turn in a province that's looted, or if they're outnumbered, then they move to an adjacent province. They move to the one with the most income, fewest defenders, and which costs the least number of movement points in that order. When they enter a province, they immediately attack and loot if they succeed. They may not retreat from combat. They cannot abide by the movement rules. They'll be disbanded. Independent states that have more than one province and have Marauder player units in one of those provinces and have their own independent state forces can move and attack those. The player with the least cards in the control pile, who is not allied to or opposed to the player who's inside the independent state, gets to move and attack. Doesn't look like he has to, but... Each player in the game places the political marker of his country into a cup. One player picks a marker out of the cup, and then that player gets to move. And then we pick another player out of the cup, and that's what these counters are for. Leaders have a movement allowance of 3 movement points. Nothing else does. A leader can move by himself or with land units. Leaders marked with a plus symbol can move an additional unit for each plus sign. Normally, a leader can move 5 combat units. A leader can only move units that begin the combat phase in the same province with him. He cannot pick up units as he moves, but he can drop them off during movement. Several leaders can move together, i.e. a pair of leaders together can move 10 units. Leaders of an ally can be declared subordinated to one player's leader, and then they can move together. A leader spends no movement points to enter a province that contains friendly political marker, i.e. he controls it. A leader may not enter a friendly state or province, however, if he does not have any movement points available, unless he gets more movement points through force march. A leader expends 1 movement point to enter a hostile state or province. Leaving a hostile area through a border with a river or mountain costs a movement point. Entering a forested province, which I guess is this symbolism there, costs an extra movement point. And all Polish provinces always cost at least 1 to enter, no matter what. When a leader moves into a hostile state or province, the defending force, garrison, or other units have a choice to fight or to retire into the city, if there is one. If they go into the city, the moving player can either continue moving or he can attack or lay siege to the city. If the defending units decide to fight in the field, a battle will be fought immediately before any other combat takes place. Now, there's going to be 2 combat rules for this game. One is a more abstracted one, and one is sort of a mini game with a tactical battlefield. And that uses these markers down here, these kind of brownish markers. Those are going to be terrain markers. They could put in squares. Now, there's no map for the battlefield. I'd have to build it myself. Just draw it on a piece of paper or something. Okay, so remember when I said you can't pick up leaders? Well, now we come to a rule which says leaders may pick up other leaders and the units co-located with them during movement. They can only be picked up if they haven't moved yet. And they forfeit their own movement and become part of the owning leader stack. So I don't know which rule to use, the game's not a heavy simulation, so it probably doesn't make too much difference which way you want to choose to interpret any inconsistencies or ambiguities. If you want to get more movement points, you can roll for a force march. You can do this at any time during your movement. It gives you additional movement points. How many? Up to 5 additional movement points. And you roll a die. If you get successful, you get the extra movement points. If you get unsuccessful, halt. You have to stop where you are, which is, means that you make a decision when you want to roll for your forced march, basically. And if you are eliminated, that just sucks, right? If you roll a forced march and some of your units get to move and some of them don't because they have modifiers, I think you roll a die for each unit as well. Yep. If you don't like where, the amount of movement points some of your units have, if some of them are being left behind, well, you can choose to just cancel the forced march after you take your risk on it. Naval units have 6 movement points each, and they don't require a leader. They cannot force march. They can only enter sea zones, and there are very few of these in here. And provinces which border those sea zones, and the cities of Copenhagen and Stockholm, which are in the sea zones, and a special unmarked off-board zone south of the English Channel over here. That's going to be the French and Spanish coasts. Costs 1 movement point to enter any one of those areas, and there's some restrictions, so you can't go west of Denmark unless you enter. You have to be on the right side of Denmark to land on that side of the coast. Units can pick up, naval units can pick up land units, as long as the land units haven't moved yet. Doesn't cost the naval unit anything to pick them up, and the land units don't pay any movement points to embark or disembark. However, they do pay a point, to embark or be transported. They do pay a point to disembark, and another if they're disembarking in a hostile province or city. The naval strength points can carry 4 land units and any number of leaders. Naval units can stay at sea, but the land units may not. They must make it to land. If a naval unit enters a sea zone, province, or city with hostile naval units, they must fight. Naval combat is conducted just like a land combat, which we don't know yet, except only the naval units, not any land units on them, can fight. Leaders aren't in effect. If the moving player's naval units are victorious, they get to continue moving. If they retreat, they must end their move in a friendly city or province bordering that sea zone. If there isn't one, you roll a die. On a 1 through 3, it sinks. On a 4, 5, or 6, it can go to any port, as long as it doesn't have to go through a hostile Denmark. Naval units in fortresses can decline combat as long as the fortress is occupied by friendly land combat units. If the fortress falls, the naval units must leave, and fight any enemy naval units that are stacked on top of them. The Bay of Biscay and the provinces along the Franco-Spanish border are not on the map. There's going to be an off-board zone, which there's no support for. These players will be placed on the coat of arms above the player's administrative track, so you could put troops in France, essentially. Naval units in the Channel may move to the off-board zone for 1 movement point, vice versa. Units in the Spanish OBZ may move either to Milan or the French OBZ by land. Units in the French OBZ may move to either Lyonnais, Bourbonnais, Savoy, or the Spanish OBZ. Moving into a hostile OBZ costs 1 movement point. Moving into a friendly one does not. You may attack units in an OBZ by moving into it as if you're the attacker, moving across a mountain border. Naval units may fight other naval units in the OBZ as if the battle occurred in a sea zone. Units in battle can retreat either to their own or one of the provinces bordering it or the Channel. If the OBZ is occupied solely by enemy units, the original owner can still build there. His units, however, may not leave the OBZ until the enemy's been driven out. It's not worth any income points, but it is worth victory points for a person who controls both the French and Spanish off-board zones. Alright, I am too tired to keep going with the rules, so we'll have to hit them tomorrow morning for the combat rolls. And good morning. Alright, land combat. When you move into a space, combat happens immediately, during movement, and it can be handled in one of 2 ways, either with a strategic battle or with this weird little board that they draw a picture of. Here, this kind of board. You should make something that looks like that, with that river or whatever in the middle, and it'll always have that line in the middle, just what the effect of it is. It's different in different battles. Alright, the defender has 2 options. He can either fight a field battle or he can fall back to an unlooted city. If he remains in the field, battle happens. If he goes into a fortress, the moving player can either storm, besiege, mask, or ignore the fortress. Okay. Siege. He needs at least as many forces in the province as the defender has, and combat will be resolved on the siege table in the defending player's movement phase. Storm. A battle is immediately fought with the defender having the advantage of the fortress. Mask. You have to leave an equal number of the attacking units, and the excess can continue moving. If you want, you can siege. I'm not sure why you wouldn't want to siege under those conditions, but whatever. Or you can just ignore them and move on. You can't stay in the province in that case, though. For a field battle, you're going to be using charts that are on the back of the rules of the field battle, right? No, that's the siege here. Oh yeah, here it is, strategic combat. So you need to have this, which is right on the back of that page, with some specifications as to modifiers. Basically, you lay out your units in a straight line. You can stack heavy or light artillery with non-artillery. You can stack with, leaders can stack with any unit, and no other units can be stacked together. Then you roll and take losses simultaneously. Where? Well, that's going to be explained later. Don't worry about it, but it's not good. Players determine which of their own units will be lost. It's going to be kind of like a buckets of dice, Axis and Allies type of game here. After each player has taken or inflicted hits, he rolls for the leaders involved in the battle. On an 11 or 12, the leader is eliminated. At the end of any round of combat, oh, look, there are more than one round. Either player, starting with the attacker, can decide to retreat. A player can retreat into a friendly city, in which case he can be besieged, stormed, masked, or ignored, or into an adjacent province. I don't know what happens if the attacker can withdraw into a city somehow, and then I don't think the defender can ignore him. I don't know. Maybe, but otherwise, what does he do? He can't siege or mask if he doesn't have enough strength points. He doesn't want to storm, so I guess we'll wait till his turn to actually have to leave. If the attacker retreats, the battle is over. If the defender retreats, the attacking player may continue moving. The player who's not retreating can use his light cav, but not leaders being used as such, to get a free shot at the retreating forces. I guess just with those. Each pursuing light cav fires with a combat strength of 3. Movement after combat. The attacker can keep moving if he wants. If nobody retreats, you just fight more rounds. Okay. So each different combat unit has a value on it. Those values aren't expressed on the counters or anywhere else. They're just here. Again, one thing I wanted to note, Rick Helly pointed out to me, his site has a lot of useful little pieces, play aids and stuff for this game. Also has some errata. It might be available somewhere else. He tends to put links to his site at other places. So if you look on Board Game Geek, you might see Rick Helly and link there to the space on his site. But it's a useful little resource, just not usually the first place that I go. He's a cool guy, giving me a couple of games to look at. P&Ps. Ooh, and I don't know. Okay, light artillery doesn't have a combat value of its own, but it increases the combat value of a unit it's stacked with by 1. And that's why it has a dash here. Heavy artillery can either fire on its own with a value of 2, or it can be added to non-artillery the same way a light artillery is, to increase the value by 1. Light and heavies cannot stack together. Leaders are going to have either a little plus or double plus. We saw that. Here, hey, we actually have some factors on counters. The big advantage of a board war game as opposed to, say, a minis game is you can actually write numbers and things on the counters. This game seems to have forgotten about that. I hope the new version rectifies that and puts numbers on the counters. I may just write them on. I'm not a collector, so... Oh, but that's a lot of writing with all these counters. Okay, terrain has effects if you crossed a mountain. All of your mounted units have their combat value lowered by 1 for all rounds of combat. In addition, the defender gets to fire first in each round, i.e. his losses are taken into account before the attackers are. If you do a naval transport to attack into a province, or you cross a river, the defender fires first in the first round only, and from then on it's simultaneous as usual. If the attacker is fighting a battle in a forest, all his mounted units have their value lowered by 1 for all rounds of combat. And then we have another set of modifiers spelled out here, but just for the die rolls, not the whole terrain effects modifiers, which are, I believe, all spelled out here, but it's mixed in with some siege things. If you roll a 6 on a combat, you're automatically going to miss, causing a casualty. You're going to miss. If you roll a 1, you automatically cause a hit. A player gets to decide which of his units take the hits. Elite infantry and gendarmes, when they take a casualty, get inverted to the weaker type. Everything else is eliminated, even if they have things on their back. If all defending enemy units in the province, including those in the fortress, are eliminated, the province has been conquered. If there are no victorious units left in the province, or if the victor continues moving without leaving units behind, the province then becomes independent, and the political marker is removed, and the card is placed in the independent state pile. If a garrison is left behind, the province stays conquered. You put a marker of the conquering player in the province, and you put the card in the conquer section, which it can be upgraded over time. Okay, fortresses. You can attack these. The storming works just like a field battle, except there's no terrain for forest, mountain, river, or beach. Heavy artillery fires simultaneously first, and then you can take casualties. Then the defender fires all of his units, including heavy artillery, and the attacker takes losses. And then the attacker fires all of his units, including heavy artillery, who've survived. Mounted units lose a point if they're for the attacker from their combat strength. If the attacker causes at least twice as many casualties as he suffered and has at least twice as many combat units, not leaders, the defender surrenders. If the defender does not surrender and has not been eliminated, more rounds of battle happen. The storm sequence continues until either side is eliminated or surrenders, or the attacker decides to stop. A siege. A fortress under siege. You have to have at least as many combat strengths outside. You resolve it during the defender's movement phase. The defender must do one of the following. Either relieve it by moving another army in which case the army under siege cannot join until the second round of combat. Sally out, in which case the besieged units attack the besieger. The storm sequence is reversed, and the besieger gets first fire, etc. Because, I don't know. And he has some defensive works, I'm assuming. And then finally the siege table, which is also embedded in the rolls here for some reason, with a die roll. And modifiers based on artillery and total numbers. Both sides get to use their attacker, one of their attackers' leader. No, one leader's bonus points for a die roll modifier too. Okay, and for this era, you wouldn't have sieges without honors of war. At any time in a storm prior to a round of combat or in a siege prior to a die roll, either player can propose honors of war. This is a diplomatic agreement whereby all or part of the units in the besieged fortress are allowed to leave and return to an adjacent friendly province. The besieger can grant the besieged units the right to traverse territory. It happens immediately. There's no requirement to do this. Basically, the two players have to agree. Now, that doesn't really fit the times. Strategically, players will probably play out more sieges than were actually fought. Honors of war were very often given by the commander. It was the principle of the time was to show that you put up a defense, and then you would be allowed out. And basically, both sides played by these rules. So, it's a little weird. If a player doesn't pay to maintain the units in his fortress, the fortress surrenders. When a fortress falls, all the national units are eliminated. Half of the non-national infantry and mounted units will be eliminated. The rest joins the victor. All the artillery joins the victor. So there's a big bonus to finishing off a siege. Leaders who are captured can be imprisoned. In whatever fortress they're in, somebody else can capture them, including the original owner who frees them. When a fortress falls in a storm or siege, you roll a die. On a 5 or a 6, or a 4 through 6 if there's mercenaries or Swiss there, the city's looted, and you use a loot marker, which is, I believe, the back side of this. Now, I don't know what the front side is. I think those are fortress markers. I guess you put them on units that are in the fortress. Again, there's a lot missing from these rolls. Or where there's a siege or something like that. I don't really know why those markers are there. Okay. Remember the optional tactical board over here. If you want to play that, each side has to have at least 6 combat units, and both people have to agree to fight a battle using the optional tactical combat rolls. I.e., if it's to either player's disadvantage, they can refuse, or you just agree at the beginning of the game you're going to play them all, or what? I don't know. I assume the latter, and then you have the right to withdraw that. The units are put aside. You roll a die. The defender rolls a die on the following tables to see what the terrain is. So, for example, here you get to see what the middle of the board is. 50% of the time there's going to be either sunken road, stream, or river. Don't ask me. The sunken road seems to be the most powerful of them all. And then you roll to see if there are bridges across it. Then you roll to see if there are towns, forests, hills, and they all get placed on the board, and then the defender rolls to see which side of the map he gets to set up on, and then the attacker sets up opposite. Then each player totals their mounted units. Light cav count as 2 units for scouting. Whoever has the most out-scouts his opponent and forces his opponent to deploy first. I will probably play with these if I can get around to drawing a map. When deploying, the player must place his units in the rows or columns designated by his alignment roll. It's all random. When he has more than 12 units and he can't fit them on the deployment area, he can put them behind as reserve. Each player gets a wagon, which are really interesting looking pieces. Once you know they're wagons, it's cool. But when I first saw it, I saw this, and it looked like... I'm sorry, you can't really see it there. You can't really see it as well. This one maybe you can. The little white stuff in there, that's the spokes of the wheels. It looked like a couple eyes and a mouth to my eyes. And I thought it looked like some kind of horrible two-headed beast out of Dragon Pass. It really looked like that kind of counter art. If you turn it over, it kind of looks like a wagon does, so that's cool. Okay, so what about the wagon? This will be it has to be placed on a starting hex. It may be stacked with units, but may never move. If an enemy enters the box with the wagon, the baggage train is destroyed, and the combat value of each unit on that side will be reduced by 1 for the battle. Combat resolution is going to be a move. Non-phasing cav gets to do a reaction move. Phasing units fire. Non-phasing cav get to move again. Losses are removed. This sounds weird. And then it's number 2 says each phase has 5 segments. What? Phasing, and then it kind of repeats it. I don't know. So basically, the phasing, I don't trust that it's correct, among other things. But anyway. The phasing player gets to move his units. All leaders and mounted units move 2 boxes. Infantry and artillery move 1. Wagons do not. You can't overstack. You're allowed to contain 1 infantry or mounted plus a leader, an artillery unit, and a wagon, as well as any terrain. Non-phasing cav may move a box subject to stacking and terrain. Light cav and leaders may still move a box even if they're not adjacent, as long as they're not adjacent to enemy light cav or leaders. Then the phasing player gets to fire. All his units adjacent to enemy units may fire against those units using their basic combat value. They must designate a target, and if they over-designate to that target, there's no slopping the losses over, so they could hit something multiple times that way. Then the non-phasing player gets to fire. Oh, Not non-phasing cav units move. That's a typo, or worse than that, but cut and paste, I don't know. Losses are removed simultaneously? Oh, why did we do this sequentially then? I don't know. Then heavy artillery, which don't have to be adjacent to the enemy. They can fire 4 boxes away. They can fire at any unit within 4 boxes with independent fire, which has a combat value of 1, or by adding its value to any one adjacent unit that's attacking the enemy within range, so they can throw their strength point in, I guess. Now this is strange because before they had a strength of 2 when firing alone, but okay. Heavy artillery, in the strategic game, heavy artillery units that are on hills can fire at any target within 4 boxes. Heavy artillery that are not on hills can fire into but not through boxes containing train or other units of either side. So some simple line of sight. They may not fire in the same round that they moved. Units can move off their own board edge by expending a movement point to go off. If they retreat off, they can't come back, and they may not be attacked by units on the board. If they've been eliminated or retreated off the board, the battle is over. Retreating units are considered to have retreated from the province in which the battle occurred and abide by the rules of this retreat from strategic combat. If a leader's in a box with a unit that's eliminated, the leader must roll for injury. On a roll of 11 or 12, the leader's eliminated. If he survives, he's placed with a different adjacent unit. If there's no adjacent unit, he's captured. For fortress storms, the river is dispensed with. Instead, the line is treated as a fortress wall. 2 bridges, gates, are placed on the wall. Deployment is set. If at the end of any round the attacking units are inside the wall, the defender must ask for honors of war. If the attacker refuses, the defender rolls a die, adding 1 for each attacker inside the wall. On a 6, the defender surrenders. At the instant the attacker enters the citadel, the fortress surrenders. Okay, let's take a bit of a break, but we're almost done. Okay, let's go to the imperial rolls, the elections. So this is a little off. At the end of any diplomatic bidding phase, any number of players who control 4 or more of the imperial elector crowns, and the cards actually have a little crown on them. There's the Palatinate Electorate. The Austrians have all the church standing behind them to begin with. Receives 1 vote for each such control card. There are 2 possible results. If one person has 4 or more votes, well, why did you guys call it if one doesn't? Well, maybe some deals weren't able to be finalized during the imperial phase. He'll be crowned emperor and gets the HRE crown card. If no player gets 4 or more votes, the player who's currently emperor retains the crown card. Only the emperor can... Okay, so this is weird because once the emperor was assigned, it couldn't really be reassigned without a death, and that's troublesome. The electors couldn't depose the emperor, theoretically. Okay, the emperor can call a diet. A diet is held at the end of a diplomatic bidding phase. Each player who controls an electoral crown card gets 1 vote for each such card. Each player who influences an electoral crown card only gets half a vote for such a card, for this. The player holding the Imperial HRE card receives 1 vote for that card in addition to anything else he holds. The Diet may vote on one of the following items, and only one. If an item gets more than 4 votes, it is passed and put into effect. If it does not, it fails and the Diet is adjourned and may not be called until the next turn. There's the Edict of Restitution. Church lands held by Protestant nobles are returned to the church. All Catholic bids for Catholic states are increased in value by 50%. The Pope supports the Emperor with a stipend of 5 crowns each turn once you do that. Sounds like a good idea. Edict of Reversal. This revokes the Edict of Restitution, including the papal stipend, and destroys church control over the land. If passed, all Protestant bids for Protestant states are doubled in value. The ban on foreign troops. If passed, all Spanish, French, and Swedish units must leave any states that they do not control. In addition, they may not enter any states that are not in their control at the time of moving. Now, I think they mean control in this sense, rather than, say, a conquest or something. The first player to ban the above breaks the ban. To violate the above breaks the ban. The player will be penalized in that all cards not marked as being hereditary, controlled, or influenced by that player are treated as anti that player for the rest of the game. You don't want to piss off the imperial subjects if they agreed to this. And that's not just imperial territory. There's non-imperial territory that'll affect too. Things like the Netherlands or something. So, ouch. No religious benefits are allowed to that player in bidding. Once the ban has been broken by one player, everyone's free to ignore it, unless a new ban is decreed. The Diet may also revoke the ban and presumably remove all penalties. No player who attended the Diet, this is the fourth of the options, the truce, players are allowed to boycott, is allowed to attack any other player who attended the Diet this turn. Now that sounds like one of the 4 things you can do. Oh, wait, it doesn't say how many items there are, so I'm thinking D is meant to be a general statement. The first player who breaks the truce by attacking another member of the Diet treats all cards not listed as being hereditary, controlled, or influenced by the player as anti that player in the next bidding phase only. Once the truce is broken, all other players are free to break it as well without penalty. So, a backstab there might be worthwhile. At the end of the turn, players count the cards in their control pile. If any player has 30 or more cards and is either the Emperor or controls 4 electoral cards, in which case it could be the Emperor, the game's over and that player wins. If there's no victor at the end of the turn, we go at least until turn 10. At the end of each turn, if no players won a victory listed above, a die is rolled. If the die is equal to the number printed below the turn number, we have those listed down here. I don't know if you can see them. I hate zooming with this camera, but it's so broken. The game is over and victory points will be counted as listed below and modified by the scenario. The player with the most points wins. All games will end by turn 15. Okay. You get victory points equal to the full value of all your controlled cards, half the value of your influenced cards, and no value for conquered cards are cards that are marked with a parentheses or plus mark. You get an additional point for each card in your control pile marked as being hereditary, controlled, or influenced by you. You get an additional point for holding certain cards. So Spain gets +1 for each French province that was occupied by the Spaniards, +2 for Channel North Sea. So basically they have some historical desires. So the Bavarians get a bonus for Protestant influence or control, and for Catholic influence and control as well. Just because they're in a weaker position, so they generate more points. Each electoral crown gives them 5. The Imperial HRE gives them 10. Each one has sort of some personal desires that are here. Austria only has penalties. They're very, very powerful at the beginning of the game. I mean, look at all the cards they have. They don't have an army, though. They have to build that. -10 if they're not the Emperor, and -20 in the Swedish scenario. We're going to play the campaign game. And the cards have been set up special situation at the beginning of the game. The French cannot move their leaders or units outside of France on turn 1 or 2 unless France is invaded. They can, however, bid for and move mercenaries and bid for other cards. Spain cannot attack the United Provinces on turn 1 because there's a treaty. The UP and Denmark may not bid for or be attacked on turn 1. These cards may not be bid for or be attacked on turn 1. These cards are shifted free of charge to Palatinate control pile during the maintenance phase of turn 2. This is when they entered the war, and especially for Denmark, this is a big deal. Sweden begins the game at war with Poland. Swedish units may only enter Swedish-controlled influence states and Polish provinces and the Baltic until one of the following conditions has been met. The Polish card has been taken into the Swedish conquer, influence, or control pile. Swedish units, provinces, or cards have been attacked or entered by non-Polish forces, or non-Polish forces hostile to Sweden have entered Poland. So we start in the era of Gustav Adolf the Great. Early scenarios of that are the Polish War. All right, as you can see, there's definitely some interesting ideas here. And it looks like a fairly simple game overall with really, really painful rules. And here's rules for playing with less players, where you're going to be sharing countries and stuff like that. And the general victory in that is that you're always allied. You can't attack or bid against each other. And I don't know how victory is determined in this case. I think winning with 1 power wins you the game, but it's not clear. It may be spelled out somewhere else. Okay. It doesn't look like this is going to be some kind of heavy simulation. Certainly not of a military aspect of things, and the movement in combat is all very light. It looks like a framework to hang a diplomatic game on with varying victory conditions, different objectives, etc. And kind of an interesting thing, and I can see why there was a desire to reprint it, especially since the designer wants to correct, some of the issues in the rules writing, as well as put out better components. So let's see how it actually plays. Send this up.